Good afternoon. My name is Sakina Moore, Program Director of the Monuments Toolkit Project. And on behalf of ICOMOS USA and World Heritage USA, I would like to welcome you to the 2025 Monuments Toolkit Summer Webinar Series, Reconciling Trauma with Monuments and Sites. This series is designed to be more than just a set of lectures. It's meant to be a space of real-time, dynamic conversations about the evolving monuments landscape. These conversations matter, not just to historians or preservation professionals, but to all of us who care about how memory lives in public place. And we are excited that you are here. Today's session is brought to you by World Heritage USA, supporting organization of ICOMOS, the International Council of Monuments and Sites, which is also known as ICOMOS USA. Since 1964, ICOMOS has worked globally to promote the conservation of cultural and natural heritage and to connect people through advocacy, education, and the international exchange of expertise and ideas. In 1972, ICOMOS was officially recognized as one of the 3 formal advisory bodies to the UNESCO World Heritage Committee. Specifically, ICOMOS is the scientific and professional advisor on all cultural heritage nominations to the World Heritage List, helping to ensure that sites are recognized, protected, and celebrated for their global significance. Today's webinar is also, as I mentioned before, is a part of the Monuments Toolkit project, which began in 2021 with the generous funding from the Mellon Foundation. And this project explores how the monuments landscape intersects with larger systems and conversations across disciplines and geographies. Before we move forward, I want to take a moment to ground us in place. We are joining you today from Washington, D.C., which sits on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Nacotchtank, Anacostan, and Piscataway peoples. As an organization that centers Indigenous history and heritage, we believe that a land acknowledgement must go beyond words. It is not enough to simply recognize the land, but we must also recognize the leadership and ongoing contributions of Indigenous communities in preserving knowledge, shaping place, and guiding how we understand and care for our cultural landscape. As I mentioned previously, today's webinar, we will explain or explore what it means to reconcile trauma with monuments and sites. Trauma is defined as an injury to living tissue caused by an extrinsic agent, such as a wound. And the secondary definition of trauma is the disordered state resulting from severe mental or emotional stress or physical injury. And as I mentioned previously, the common theme that we will explore during this webinar is the consequences of what happens when the root cause is external. We will not only learn about the legacies of slavery and colonialism, but also learn about conversations that call attention to the past and how acknowledging traumatic and uncomfortable histories can forge a path forward to healing. And with that, I wanted to introduce our speakers for today. We are joined by Father Tom Elawat from the Mission Basilica San Buenaventura. Father Tom Elawat, for the past 15 years, has served as the priest pastor in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles at Mission Basilica San Buenaventura, the 9th and last California mission founded by Saint Junipero Serra. Formerly, he served in the secondary educational ministry for 30 years, 20 of which was head of school at 2 high schools. He earned a BA from the Long Beach State University and an MA in school administration from California Polytechnic University, San Luis Obispo, and a master's in divinity from St. John's Seminary in Camarillo, California. Stephen Hammond is a founder of Syfax Pathfinders. A Denver, Colorado native, Mr. Hammond is a retired federal employee, having spent his entire 40-year career as an earth scientist with the United States Geological Survey. He is now a scientist emeritus with the agency. Steve is a seventh-generation member of the Syfax family of Washington, D.C. and Virginia, a line that moved by force to New Orleans and then by choice to Denver. He has participated in a variety of National Park Service programs at Arlington House, the Robert E. Lee Memorial to highlight the lives of his Syfax ancestors and other enslaved Americans on the plantation. He has spoken at the African American Civil War Museum and the historic Decatur House on Lafayette Square, and has contributed to exhibits and programs at George Washington's Mount Vernon, the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, the National Archives and Records Administration, and the Arlington National Cemetery. He is working with elected officials to pass federal legislation that will redesignate Arlington House as Arlington House National Historic Site to be inclusive of the broader history at the site. Steve is a charter member of the Sons and Daughters of the United States Middle Passage. He is a member of the Sons of the Union Veterans of the Civil War, and he was named the Virginia Humanities Scholar for his work in exploring African American life and achievement in Virginia, and is recipient of the Meritorious Achievement Award from Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. Steve received an honorary doctorate from his alma mater, Whitman College, where he is a trustee emeritus. Aaron Leggett is the head of the Indigenous Place Names Project. Aaron Leggett is the president of the native village of Eklutna, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing the names, and also the special exhibit curator for the Anchorage Museum. He is the founder of the Indigenous Place Names Project, a movement to bring Dinaina culture to Anchorage's built environment and place name signage. Leggett's work includes scholarly articles about the Dinaina language and people, and he has also co-authored several publications, including Dinaina Heritage and Representation in Anchorage, Alaska. Dinaina Nato, Our Special Place, and Sakut Togut, Alaska Native Corporations, an overview of ANCSA. He also served as one of the editors and contributors to the exhibition catalog for Dinainak Huk Ulaleshi, the Dinaina Way of Living. Leggett was an influential voice in naming the Dinaina Civic and Convention Center in Anchorage and helped select the art that is displayed there. He has been involved in putting up a series of interpretive signage around Anchorage that reflect Dinaina culture, including near Ship Creek, Chester Park, and Potter Marsh. And with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Father Tom Elawat. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to participate in this conversation. I come to you from Mission Basilica San Buenaventura in the city of San Buenaventura, or Ventura, California, on the ancestral land of the Ventorino Barbarino tribe of Mission Indians, who occupied and lived and called this home for some 15 to 17,000 years. With regards to this discussion, I just keep having one word resonate in my mind, and that is respect, 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 and a little humility. I have found that my relations with the former tribal chair was solidified when I first arrived here in 2011, realizing that something was going on the mission property and consulting her immediately. And it was other personages who were not indigenous to this area, who were seeking to have a reconciliation on behalf of the local indigenous, and that was an affront to them. So I've learned over the years, always consult the tribal leadership on anything and everything that is going on, even sometimes our public services or processions. I respect and let them know we're doing this. They're welcome. Some of the ancestral or descendants are practicing Catholic. We have the concern that with regards to historic sites was and monuments was a statue of Saint Junipero Serra, the founder of the first 9 of the 21 missions that are located all the way from San Diego to San Rafael throughout the state of California under the Spanish leadership of the day, founded originally for 1769 in San Diego. Our mission was founded in 1782. A concrete statue was in front of City Hall since 1936, and it was replaced with a bronze statue in the late 1980s. And here's a statue as it stood in front of City Hall. And that statue was a hallmark because when you come off the freeway, you would see that. And a lot of people just thought it was an extraordinary, beautiful statue that represented a padre, a Franciscan, who came to evangelize and to establish Western culture here in California. Little did I know at the time the concern that many descendants of indigenous people had with the statue, remembering some hurts. And anytime you have an acquisition of land, there are good, the bad, and the ugly. And so with regards to the beginning of monuments being considered unworthy for public display, especially in the Confederacy areas, former Confederacy areas of the United States, our statue came under attack as well. But here's where respect comes in. Our tribal chair notified me and the mayor a week ahead of time, and so we constructed a public letter of our desire in relationship to each other that maybe the time has come to relocate the statue, but we did not want violence, nor did we want the statue destroyed. And what I find in this letter on the second paragraph, we sought without uncivil discourse and character assassination. We were taking this action without that, much less vandalism. And Julie Tumamayat Stensley, the tribal chair, I'm not sure if she created this quote or borrowed it from someone else, but it resonated so much. True conversion starts with an open heart and mind. Change comes when there is no longer judgment or assumptions. To listen to and to be heard is crucial. And as a side note, Julie and I had this already about a 10-year relationship of respect and ceremonies, indigenous ceremonies being held here, and especially even sometimes when we had Catholic Church prelates here. And she's always offered blessings. But what is interesting is on the day of the protest, which was not called by the local indigenous descendants, it was called by outsiders. And so she and I stood together and introduced ourselves. And the moderator for that rally, which the goal was to tear the statue down that day, said that she would be the first to speak, and perhaps if there was time at the end, I would be the last to speak. She heard that. We had a relationship with each other. She chided everyone that they shouldn't be here, that it was a discussion among her tribe and people and not outsiders. Nevertheless, she felt the statue should come down and express some hurts that their people had experienced over the last 2 centuries. And then she says, and the next person to speak is Father Tom, and hands me the microphone. That's respect. That's working together. And so we have achieved that here. The statue now is And we have another picture where the statue has been relocated to Mission San Buenaventura. It took about 4 years because of some litigation by others who wanted the statue returned. Obviously, it's not on a high pedestal that it is. The statue is over 9 feet tall to begin with, but it has become now a beacon of discussion. And we actually have, I don't have a picture of it, but just to the left of the statue is the original plaque of why it was put in front of City Hall and then how it came here. And I included the quote from Julie Tumamaya Stencili, the tribal chair, that true conversion starts with an open heart and mind. Change comes when there is no judgment or assumptions, and to listen to and to be heard is crucial. Now, obviously, there are polemics involved in anything like what we're talking about today, but we have bridged a gap of respect. And now there's a new tribal chair, and he and I communicate with some frequency. We support initiatives that they wish to put forward, either physically here at the mission, sometimes even using my office on a weekend for meetings. And we contribute to a scholarship to educate their young people. And we just have to keep, we're looking at our museum and our website to further tell the story and the history of the Chumash, Venturino Barbarino Chumash, as authentically as we can. I did participate for the city of Los Angeles shortly after the 2020 concerns with the statues of Sarah throughout the state. And Mayor Garcetti at that time asked for discussions. And so the history department of USC invited me to participate with other Indigenous people from other locations. And then, of course, because it became city record, we had to sign off on those discussions. There were 3 of them over time. And one of the comments made disparaged Junipero Serra in a way that I had never heard or read before. And I've read several significant books that resource the primary resources and oral traditions. And so I objected to signing it. And when the history department at USC investigated it, they found that it was a misquote from another bishop of another country who visited here and didn't understand Spanish so well. And so they removed it from the a document. And some of these things cause grave hurt and harm because basically the quote said, which was incorrect, that Sarah told the viceroy from Mexico that they all should be killed. And that was not true at all, and it was substantiated. So we have to look and find respect and find commonality. Today, the statue, as I said, remains a beacon of that discussion. And there are, Paulus Press is working on a documentary that they have titled Reconciling. They have titled it, I'm misunderstanding it here now. At any rate, on debating statues and saints, the legacy of Junipero Serra, and that'll be released this coming spring. And that's a series of interviews with Julie Chumamai, myself, but other people and other listening sessions. Secondly, I just finished an early morning meeting with the California Catholic Conference of Bishops. I'm the chair of a task force, of a subcommittee, and we are looking at ways in which we can better tell the Indigenous story in our museums, our websites, and have listening sessions to show respect and working together to build a bridge that brings harmony and not dissent or deceit. I'm willing to take any questions or comments.
Great. Thank you so much, Father Tom Elawat, for your great presentation. We do have a question and answer session at the end. So in the meantime, if you want to submit questions, you may do so. We do have a chat box, actually the Q&A section, and you can click on that and submit your questions, and we'll do our best to answer your questions when we bring on all of the panelists.
I
Next.
would just like to also, I forgot to mention, and we do have a slide on that. There are 2 pivotal documents that have come out, and we have a slide on that. One is Keeping Christ's Sacred Promise, which is from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, a pastoral framework for Indigenous ministry and respecting and enhancing their role in the church where they want. The other one is called the Native American Protocols that our Archbishop Jose Gomez worked with 3 tribes in our diocese and took years to come with protocols and understandings for Indigenous ceremonies on the land and the missions for which their ancestors built. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you again, Father Tom Alawat, again, for the clarification with your presentation. And again, we do invite you to submit any questions that you have for the panelists, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of the presentations. So next, I would like to invite Stephen Hammond, head of to speak. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Sequina. And I also want to thank you for your initial comments about recognizing the Indigenous people in the Washington, D.C. area, an area that where I'm coming to you from today and means a great deal to me. I'm going to start a PowerPoint presentation here. And see if we can make this work. So hopefully you can see the slide there. What you're looking at is Arlington National Cemetery. You can see all of the headstones that are there, but you can also see a large mansion up there on the hill. And that is a plantation house that was built between 1802 and 1818 by George Washington Parke Custis, the grandson of Martha Washington. You get a good sense for where this area is located from the moving picture there on the left, but on the right-hand side, you can see a map. The star on the left here is where Arlington House is located. The view that we have in the video looking across the bridge, the Memorial Bridge, is looking over towards the Lincoln Memorial. And we have up here at the top, the White House, the Capitol over to the east, and down in the southeast on the west side of the Potomac River is the Pentagon. So you get a sense for where this location is at. The cemetery is about 640 acres in size, and the original plantation was about 1,100 acres in size, to give you a sense for the space that we have there. The reason that this space is so important to me and why I think that it could be important to others is because of the fact that this space enslaved people, and in my case, enslaved my ancestors. In fact, my third great aunt, you can see Mariah Syphax there on the upper right-hand corner, was the daughter of George Washington Parke Custis and an enslaved woman. So, as I mentioned, George Washington Parke Custis is the grandson of Martha Washington, who's seen up at the top of that slide. Mariah Syphax is a direct descendant of Martha Washington. Mariah married Charles Syphax in 1821 in the parlor of the mansion that you just saw a moment ago. Charles Syphax is my third great uncle, and his sister is my direct ancestor, Nancy Syphax, who was also enslaved in Washington, D.C. So the fact that these people were enslaved in this space, and there's been not enough recognition of the history of this space, I think is really critical. The one piece that I haven't mentioned here in this is that if you look over to the left-hand side of where Mariah is shown here, here's Mariah and Charles. Over here to the left, George Washington Parke Custis also had a daughter with his wife, and she married Robert E. Lee. This marriage occurred in 1831, 10 years after Mariah and Charles got married. It occurred in the same place in the house, in the parlor. So not only is Mariah direct descendant from Martha Washington, She's also the half brother-in-law of Robert E. Lee. So all of these children down here are cousins. And that's part of the history that doesn't get talked about much at Arlington House. So I wanted to show you just a real quick summary of the history at Arlington House. I'm not asking you to take all of this in, but you can see some of the dates that are in red. Over on the left-hand side, you can see where Robert E. Lee enters the picture. He married into this household. Many people think that this plantation house, which is currently called Arlington House, the Robert E. Lee Memorial, it's managed by the National Park Service, is a place that Robert E. Lee built, and it was his space. Well, the truth of the matter is that Robert E. Lee married into this family. He spent about 8 of 31 years married to Mary at the house. The rest of the time he was off serving in the U.S. Army and other locations. And in 1862, this is the location where he actually, in 1861, this is actually the location where he commits treason and leaves the U.S. Army. It's a pretty amazing history that's here. But Robert E. Lee is only part of that history. He's not the history, he's part of the history. Over on the right-hand side, you can see that there has been a number of legislative changes. The legislative history here is pretty profound over the course of 160, 170 years. And you can see how the tax law was changed in 1863. And when that occurred, the Syphaxes actually had been given property by George Washington Parke Custis. And when the property was taken by the federal government, the Syphaxes became squatters on property that was given to them because they couldn't show that they owned it. If we move further down, we can see as recently as 1972, Arlington House, the name was actually changed to the Robert E. Lee Memorial. It had had other names prior to that. And in recent years, the descendants of Arlington House have been working to pass legislation to redesignate Arlington House as Arlington House, the Robert E. Lee, Arlington House National Historic Site, excuse me. I wanted to talk a little bit about why this is a trauma site. Why, what is it about this site that has caused trauma? There are narratives that have romanticized this site. They're talking about the lives of the Custises and the Lees and giving no attention to those people who were enslaved in the space and really helped to take care of it. There's very little talk about Robert E. Lee as an enslaver. He's memorialized here as a hero and as a unifying figure in U.S. history, and not as someone who also enslaved others, or at least acknowledging that. The enslaver, George Washington Parke Custis, as I mentioned, fathered Maria Carter Custis Syphax. He raped her mother, as well as other enslaved women in that space over time. The history and telling of this space was at one time a costumed antebellum interpretation, which was more about dancing and the costumes and how people dressed. And that was not reflective of the history that's in that space. The National Park Service created a community of practice in which a number of folks were involved with talking about how the space could be interpreted differently. I was a part of that. And yet we were not being asked what we wanted. We were being told what the Park Service was doing, but we did not. It was not a two-way conversation. It was not a space to build trust. So whose trauma was this? Well, it was the descendant family members, those people of the enslaved and the enslavers in this space, both, have experienced trauma. And I think it's also trauma about a nation who even today is struggling to heal and repair from the Civil War. It's a divided country in a lot of ways. I think National Park Service visitors maybe experience trauma but don't realize it not having been told the entire story. And that's one of the things that we're working to do here. And recently, and National Park Service staff who have been instructed to do what they can, but are being limited in terms of how they interpret the site today. So I wanted to give you just a minute or so to look at this slide to let you know that we as descendant family members have come together to put our voices together and to accomplish several things to help reclaim the narrative at this space, and also do things that we can help bring descendants together, bring our country together, and learn and work at helping to have conversations that are difficult but are important in terms of bringing our country together. I want to highlight the second bullet there, which is we're trying to speak up and reclaim the Arlington House narrative and redesignate the space, which I think is extremely important. There are a number of bullets on this space that I think are important to talk about, but we don't have an opportunity to go into those in much detail. But you can see there are a number of things that I think are really valuable and important to try to generate conversation and think about how we interpret spaces of trauma like Arlington House. So as I said, one of the things that we are trying to do is speak up to reclaim our narrative. And there have been 4 introductions of legislation to redesignate this space as a national park, as a national historic site versus a memorial to Robert E. Lee. And the most recent introduction was just in February of this year. When you think about everything that's been going on in our country, the fact that this representative, Don Beyer of Virginia, has felt it important to reintroduce this legislation, I think is really pretty astounding and amazing. And so we continue to work on this, recognizing that the winds are pushing against us to get something like this passed, but we think it's really important to keep it in the public eye and help educate and help people understand why this is important. So just recently, as of this morning, we have in a petition that descendants have put together, more than 5,200 people from around the country have signed this petition. The goal here is not to have a certain number, but to show support from every corner of the United States. And you can see here in the upper right-hand corner, kind of the arc that we're on in terms of growing the number of total petition signers, but you can also see where we are by state. And we have about 23 states that have over 50 people. But the most astounding thing for me is that there are people in every congressional district in the United States of America who have signed this petition who think that it's important. So people across this country believe that we can do better by Arlington House to tell a better, more inclusive story. So with that, I want to thank you, and I look forward to our conversation in a few minutes when questions are asked.
And thank you very much, Stephen Hammond, for the presentation. And again, if you have any questions for the panelists, please feel free to enter your question in the Q&A portion of the chat box that appears at the bottom of the screen, and we will do our best to answer your questions at the end of the presentations. On that note, I wanted to welcome Aaron Leggett from the Indigenous Place Names Project. Thank you.
Thank you. Yali Atlanda Shishida Aaron Leggett Gashtanak Shi Chu Chada Danainak Shi Nolchinatlan Chu Idlagat Skayaktish Tukta Rick Leggett Shunkda Diane Bowles. I said hello everybody in Upper Cook Inlet, Denine Athabasca. My name is Aaron Leggett, and I have the honor of serving as the president of the Native Village of Eklutna. The Native Village of Eklutna is the only federally and now state-recognized tribe here in the municipality of Anchorage. And, okay, I'm trying to share my screen here. Try this. There we go. Great. So just to give you a sense of where we are, um, the Dena'ina people are the indigenous people of South Central Alaska. Today, about half the state's population lives in our traditional homeland, but until very recently, there was no formal recognition. When I was a kid and there was discussion about what is the history of this place, this is what usually came up. In late May 1778, Captain James Cook, sailing for the British Crown, sailed up into our area, did some mapping, um, uh, didn't really find this area to be this interesting. He was looking, of course, for the fabled Northwest Passage. He then later sailed further up into Alaska and then ultimately back to the Hawaiian Islands where he met his ends. As far as actual recognition of the Dena'ina, on the corner of 3rd and F Street, there was one tiny bit of a sign that gave recognition, uh, not very well. It said two things. It said the Dena'ina Indians who lived in the Cook Inlet region when Captain Cook arrives on these shores had probably been here no more than a few generations. Archaeologists believe the Pacific Eskimo people dominated this area at least seasonally until about 1700. Well, that was based on one archaeologist's opinion from the late 1960s. We've proven that the Dena'ina have been in this area for well over 1,000 years. The second thing it said was in 1839, nearly half the population of Native people was living around Cook Inlet was killed in a terrible smallpox epidemic. These Dena'ina Indians living near the town of Kinnick were photographed in 1906. Dena'ina is an older spelling of Dena'ina. It has to do with the translations from Russian to German to English. So the D became a T. But in concert, basically what this sign to me said as a young person, becoming aware was that, well, we hadn't been here very long and we probably don't exist anymore. And that's just not factually true. There's a picture of the sign and its location. In 2001, I started working at the Alaska Native Heritage Center, where I really reconnected with my Dena'ina roots. Again, being the only village in the municipality of Anchorage, we're a very small percentage of people. And I was quite shocked when I discovered other Alaska Natives, some of whom had grown up in Anchorage, didn't realize that this was a native place. And one of the reasons I realized that they didn't realize it was a native place is they didn't see it in front of them anywhere. So I went to the University of Alaska Anchorage, got a bachelor's degree in anthropology, and worked on a number of projects, including the first building in Anchorage for one of our regional native nonprofits to have a Dena'ina name. It means Natoch, which is our special place. Shortly thereafter, there was discussion about what the new name for a $110 million civic and convention center should be. We had tried previously to get two local high schools in Anchorage that were being built at the time to honor the Dena'ina, and although they were considered, I would say they were not considered very seriously. However, something had shifted, and there was a committee put together for the the naming of the new convention center, and myself and several other Dena'ina people testified that for once, instead of naming a building after one individual, that it really would do something for the city of Anchorage if it had honored the first people of the place. Much to my surprise, the committee agreed with that recommendation, and then it went to our local city government, where it was passed unanimously. This created an upswelling of questions of what's this name? How do I say it? Who are these people? Why have I never heard of them? I've lived here my whole life. So there was an education campaign that was undertaken and still continues to this day. In addition to the name of the building itself, each one of the conference rooms represents one of the Dena'ina villages that is located on Cook Inlet. And the logo itself for the convention center has an abstraction of a traditional wooden Dena'ina fish trap. Here you can see Wayne Dick from Lime Village constructing a very similar fish trap to one that exists now in the Dena'ina Center. Also, around this time, the museum that I work at, the Anchorage Museum, was undergoing a $100 million expansion. And one of the pieces of that expansion was a $50 million branch of the Arctic Study Center, which is a combination of the National Museum of Natural History at the Smithsonian and the National Museum of the American Indian. And inside the exhibition space, there is basically a land acknowledgement and a deny and a welcome wall that tells who the people are, where our villages are located, and traditional place names. This, as far as I know, would be the first sort of public, I guess, land acknowledgement or land recognition, and this opened in 2010. In addition, during that time, I worked closely with the city of Anchorage and its Parks Department to install a series of traditional interpretive panels along various parks and creeks throughout the municipality of Anchorage, telling a bit of our history. Also in 2016 or 15, the years are starting to get a little blurry here, I worked with internationally known indigenous artist Edgar Heap of Birds as part of his native host project that he's installed around the world and in a number of locations in the United States, that basically puts a sign up that says who the local host is, so to speak. So it's like a land acknowledgement. And you'll see that the name of the place is put backwards to draw people's attention. In this case, Edgar wanted to celebrate all of the indigenous peoples of Alaska with a special recognition for the Dena'ina, and that was put inside the building of the museum. And now all 13 signs are part of the permanent collection. That was 2016 in the Anchorage Museum. In addition to that, I've had the opportunity to work with the Anchorage Museum on a number of projects, kind of pop-up things. Some of these things last, a short period of time, and some are more permanent. This was done during Alaska Design Week in 2017. We were able to recycle some old telephone pieces, and you could use your cell phone to call this number that's listed on here, and an audio recording told in the Dena'ina language would tell you about the particular location where you are, or a story associated with it. This was another project that we did down near the port of Anchorage, which was literally where the founding of Anchorage started. It was called Tidelands. It's looking towards a Dena'ina fish camp near this location that would have been severely impacted by a bridge across Kinnick Arm. Some of you may remember, almost 20 years ago, there was discussions of these so-called bridges to nowhere. Well, this was one of the bridges to nowhere. It would have connected Anchorage to the Matsu Valley across Kinnick Arm, but it would have went right over the top of a Dena'ina fish camp that was occupied up until World War II. In addition, the Anchorage Museum has seen its role in many ways of really helping spearhead these efforts. Inside the museum, we have the declarative statement that this is Dena'ina Elfnena. That means this is the Dena'ina homeland. We have a land acknowledgement that we explain what it means, and also what land acknowledgements and recognition truly look like, and how they're a powerful tool to get recognition for indigenous populations. Another series of signage that was installed in 2019 up in Chugach State Park. Another thing that the Native Village of Eklutna is incredibly proud of is our relationship with our local military base. I would say from our experience, when it comes to government consultation, the military has been one of our best partners in the last 30 to 35 years, and they truly understand what that means. And in 2018, I had the opportunity to meet the new base commander. Of course, they rotate out every few years, Colonel Schenk. And both Colonel Schenk and I had a background in anthropology and archaeology before she joined the military. And so I remember sitting in her office and I told her, well, wouldn't it be great if as you were entering or exiting the base, that you acknowledge that the base sits on the traditional homeland of the Dena'ina, and that the people that are coming here, many of whom are not from Alaska, that they travel through this land with respect for both the plants and wildlife, and that it formally recognize our partnership as two government entities. And much to my surprise, she said, that's a wonderful idea. This happened in, I think the meeting was towards the end of September of 2018, and the sign was produced and put up on the base for November of 2018. So one of the quickest turnarounds I've ever had for a project, and it was really quite fulfilling to see how fast things can move when the red tape is cut through, or I guess in this case, when the base commander says, make it so. Here you can see it installed right on the right near the entrance or exit to the base. Also, as I mentioned earlier, this is looking towards that location of that Dena'ina fish camp. And there was a set of funds, historical mitigation funds, that were set up with that project that would have went across Kinnick Arm, and it got tied up in a bunch of legal back and forths for the project. Ultimately, the project never went forward, and also there was some money associated with the expansion of the Port of Anchorage. And there had been discussion going all the way back, I think, to 2005 about what the Dena'ina would like to see and how they would like to use those funds. And myself and the council, in kind of a subtle nod towards the Captain Cook statue, decided that we wanted to have our own statue that had a Dena'ina woman based on one of our matriarchs from the native village of Klutna. And she's looking towards the fish camp, and we have a bit of a fish camp installation and tell a bit of our history and so forth. Then also around that time, we started planning for what ultimately has become the Indigenous Place Name Marker Project. We identified 32 locations throughout the municipality of Anchorage. We brought together a team of community partners. I think there's, close to 20 organizations that support this kind of work in Anchorage. And after having a series of initial meetings, it came down to basically the elements that exist for our project. And those were that it be monumental, that it they be respectful for the indigenous population, that it incorporate the Dena'ina language, and then towards the end, we had a grant that was already out that we weren't that we didn't apply for, but tied in nicely to this project, and there was an art component that existed, and so we incorporated that art section. This is an abstraction of what's called the Dena'ina fire bag. It was a very important personal item that people would carry. Traditionally, they would carry things that you would use to start a fire later on, things that you wanted close to you, and things for like ammunition for guns and things like that. So we designed these, and we knew that they were going to be expensive and that it would take us a while to fundraise for this. This is different locations. The first 10 that we identified were really the most highly visited locations that we knew that we would want to install these signs at, and kind of, in other words, get your biggest bang for your buck out of it. And then the other 22 are in more remote locations. Some are in the uplands, but it gives you a sense. Then we also identified a couple of locations where we really wanted to make a big statement and create almost what we were referring to as a plaza that really celebrates a location. And these would be in highly visited and trafficked locations along our wonderful trail system throughout the municipality of Anchorage. And this is one of the first signs that was installed. This is down at Chester Creek, or Chanchnu. Chanchnu means grass creek. Um, when the map makers came through the area, probably around 1918, 1919, and they encountered the Dena'ina fishing there, they asked them, "What do you call this place?" We said Chanchnu. They wrote it down as Chester. We said, well, close enough. So this has been part of the narrative that to kind of dispel this idea that there was some homesteader named Old Man Chester that had a whiskey still or something like that located along the creek. But it really is reflective of that Dena'ina name for Grass Creek. And if you look to the extreme right of the image and the extreme left, you can see some of that grass that is being referred to in the name. This is another one. This is located towards the headwaters of Chanchnu in a park in northeast Anchorage called Chanchnu Muldoon Park. This was part of redesigning a park and also habitat restoration that increased river flow or stream flow in the creek. And one of the most meaningful things to me was after having installed this sign, um, and as a kid, I grew up in this area, and where this sign literally sits used to be a large greenhouse that we used to go to every year to pick out our Christmas tree. And as a little kid, I can remember this little trickle of a stream inside the greenhouse that you could, even as a little kid, jump from one side to the other. But when we installed this, and in the fall, I remember going down to this newly rehabbed creek and actually seeing several fish that had made their way all the way up there. And it's not something I could have imagined as a kid. So this got the attention of the Washington Post during Alaska Native American Heritage Month, talking about the project. And this was in 2021, and towards the end of 2021, still kind of during the pandemic. Um, and I knew that they were going to feature this article. What I didn't know is that it would make the front page, although I'm below the fold, not above the fold. So my next goal is to get above the fold in the Washington Post. And then I think on the backs of this effort and other local press, we were pleased to be contacted in 2022 by the Mellon Foundation, and as part of their Monuments Project, and having read through what the Monuments Project was intending to do, I thought it was a clear fit, and obviously so did Mellon. And we were very pleased to discover that they wanted to fund the entire project to the tune of 1.7 to make this whole project a reality. One thing I did want to circle back on, and I was struck by Father Tom's discussion during the summer of 2020, as there was this, I guess you could call it a national reckoning around statues and monuments. There was a call very similar to remove the Captain Cook statue, um, but also related, this was not coming from the local tribe. It was coming from other Alaska Natives living in Anchorage. In fact, we hadn't been consulted directly, and there was a push to figure out, well, first, who owned the statue, which was a long, convoluted story that I won't get into details about. Um, but to the credit of then Mayor Ethan Berkowitz, he called me up, and he and I had a relationship uh, in working on a number of projects. And some people say he kind of passed the buck. Other people say he left the decision in my hands. Whatever the case, I thought it was the appropriate decision. And it was not a popular one because I was getting attacked on both sides. I was getting attacked by the people that say, how dare you tear down this Captain Cook statue? He was a great explorer, so on and so forth. And then I was getting attacked from other people, again, many indigenous people, not of this area, saying, how dare you keep this up? He enslaved all these, well, he didn't enslave people, but he did a lot of harm to indigenous communities, especially in the Pacific Islands. Um, I, as the senior curator of Alaska History and Indigenous Culture at the Anchorage Museum, has spent several decades studying Captain Cook and knowing the whole picture and the whole history. And my interpretation of what I've seen from this area is that, number one, Cook never got off the boat. He wasn't really impressed with this area, and his encounter with this place was pretty fleeting. So I wanted to tell a more complete story, and one of the things that I had always imagined is at the Captain Cook Monument in downtown Anchorage, there's a beautiful view of the mountains and the ocean of Cook Inlet, and to tell all the Dena'ina place names of this place, but also to tell a more complete history that you can see described that really puts the Dena'ina back into this story. And ultimately, the statue still remains, but this new interpretation, I think, tells a much more complete history. And I knew that the monument itself is an attractor of people that are visiting Anchorage, and that this would be a wonderful educational opportunity to get people to understand that this has been and always will be a Dena'ina place. And last but not least, and if you didn't know and you're in downtown Anchorage, on between 6th and 7th Avenue at the Anchorage Museum since 2018, we have put on the front of our museum that this is Dena'ina Elfnena. This is the Dena'ina homeland. So, Chinan, that's all I got.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Erin, for Leggett, for sharing with us your project in Anchorage. And I wanted to invite everyone to the stage, so to speak, of the Zoom meeting. And I invite you again, if you have any questions for the panelists, please feel free to click on the Q&A box and type in your question, and we will be more than happy to answer your question. We did have a question about slides. Yes, and we did answer it, and yes, we will be sending the slides. If the panelists are okay, we can also follow up with the slides for the presentation. We did have another question and about signing a petition to support Arlington's name change. And Stephen did share that with us, and we can also share it in the in follow-ups as well. So
one thing I want to add to that, if I may.
Yes.
So one of the things that I tried to do consciously is to not use the word change. I use the word redesignate. And the reason that I do that is because I want to keep people in the conversation. When you think about change or remove or take away, people immediately become defensive. And I think it's really important for people to understand, as we work to educate them in spaces like this, that can only speak to our case, is that our goal is not to remove Robert E. Lee from the story. Robert E. Lee is a part of this important story, but he's only a part of the story. He's not the story. The goal is to try to be more inclusive of all the people that have an impact in this space. And so I consciously use the term redesignate. So I encourage you, as you share this with friends and et cetera, think about redesignate versus change or take away.
Yes. And Stephen, I'm so happy that you mentioned that. And I think that that's one of the challenges that we're seeing even today, always, but even more so today with how we word things, and also with, when you mention one term, that image comes to mind, and it really shuts people off who really need to be a part of the conversation as well. Because again, by joining together, we can heal together and move together as a society. One of the questions I actually had for you, Stephen, is about the initiative at the Arlington House and getting together the white descendants and the Black descendants. And can you speak to that process? Because I know that even with sites of trauma, people who are a part of the traumatizing, they would say, oh, we don't, this is not us, this is not our story, we don't want to be a part of it, because again, there is that facing uncomfortable histories, because you're like, oh, that was my 3 times great grandfather, that's not who I am. So can you speak to that experience?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking the question. You know, it's easy, but it's complex at the same time. You know, we as humans make things more difficult than they need to be a lot of times. And I would say to start is that I mentioned during my slide presentation that the Park Service began this community of practice, which was intended to bring people together to talk about the things that were going on at Arlington House, but it was a conversation that we were being spoken to. We were not part of the conversation. And so we felt continuously, we asked them, where are the rest of the descendants? How come we're not in this conversation together? So ultimately, fast forward a couple of years, the Arlington House closes as the result of a renovation that they have been given money for by David Rubenstein. And during the period of closure, while the house was being worked on, the Park Service, the light bulb went on for the superintendent, and they had a conversation with descendants, and they said, "What do you want as we start to think about reopening this space?" And one of the things that my cousin, one of my genealogy partners, basically said to the Park Service was, bring us together. We want to be able to talk to the other descendants. You all have been talking to us like spokes on a wheel, individually and not together. So how can we bring this together? So the Park Service was put into a pretty difficult spot of saying, okay, well, let's see what we can do. Ultimately, they found a facilitator who was wonderful at bringing groups together. We started by talking amongst our individual families to figure out what it is, you know, what it means to come together. What does it mean to have these conversations? The fact that people are in different spaces. And in April of 2021, we came together as multiple families for the first time. And that was pretty amazing. And over the course, we continue to meet monthly. This includes people that are descendants of the enslaved as well as enslavers. And we have built a level of trust that has allowed us to have difficult conversations and to move our ideas and thoughts and goals forward in a way that we think that will not only be helpful for our healing and our repair, but also for that of the country and how the Park Service tells these kinds of stories in other places.
Okay. I think that something that you said, something that was very, very prescient, or very, very, that was very resonant, was bring us together. And I'm going to open it up to the rest of the panelists, because I think that there is definitely there is a common theme about having the conversations, and how, even though we are all experiencing trauma, and everyone has a reaction to it. And I want to scroll out and just give it more context. Father Tom Elowat, you were mentioning that during the protests in 2020, that there was that there was a lot of everybody had a take on what should be done, but then you centered it and said, oh, then the thought was to actually center it to the communities that were affected. And I wanted to ask that the question to the group is, how do you cut through the chatter because everybody has a take of what should be done. But what is, or maybe speak to the importance of why you want to center the communities that were directly impacted first.
Yes, and I go back to my first opening remarks, respect, respect, respect. I feel for Aaron because I too received a lot of hate mail on both sides of the issue. And of course, being a high school educator for 30 years and principal for 20, rarely but occasionally I heard a word that began with F, but I heard it thousands of times at those protests. And I understand the trauma in this context. I mean, I can't get into the skin of Indigenous people and how they feel, but when I arrived at the mission, our docents were saying the Padres built the missions, the priests, Franciscan priests. At any one mission, generally speaking, there were 2 priests and maybe 2 soldiers. A few more at presidios, which there are 4 throughout the state, were garrisons, if you will. So who built the missions? The indigenous people. I mean, obviously, the Franciscan Padres had some architectural instruction or things and that, but it's the story. But that way we can thank the California tourism and even the Auto Club in the early 1920s and 30s, bringing in a lure to bring people to California. But that story pervaded for a long time. And so we've had to establish protocols for our docents and tell the actual story of what happened. And of course, on the other side, some people will say that the church enslaved these people. Well, it may have happened a little bit in one context, but generally speaking, once you're converted, if you be baptized, which they didn't do overnight, then you were expected to live at the mission and live a Catholic Christian lifestyle. And so occasionally, if someone wanted to go back, that was considered taboo by the priest at that time, but they would try to bring them back. But they weren't enslaved. In fact, sometimes they brought in indigenous people from other areas too. So, but it's, you know, when you start using words, they have meaning and there's conceptions of what they mean, which there's truth to it in certain areas. And so how do you look at it? It's interesting because that statue that I showed you, the bronze statue, it was designed during the WPA days in 1936, and it was concrete with the support of the leadership of the indigenous people. And then the bronze one, because the concrete one started to deteriorate, the bronze one on the committee was Chief Vincent, who was the tribal chief of this area for many, many years. And he was the father to Julie Tillamite Stensley, whom I worked with. But he was on the committee to have that statue put up. So, you know, his understanding of things and enlightenment and what happens in that, it evolves, but respect, 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 and dialogue. And very important. Our museum is being looked at in dialogue with Indigenous descendants. Are we telling a true story?
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that
And
really,
I think trauma affects those people too. You know, it's not about those people who are necessarily at the site, but those people who are coming to visit sites like this experience a trauma that they may not be completely aware of, in that they're not hearing about the whole history. So they are losers and are traumatized as a result of that as well, in my opinion.
Well, I can appreciate that. You know, at the Autry Western Museum in Los Angeles, Gene Autry, there's at the Norman Sprague Gallery, there's a presentation on the far side of the indigenous people. And so they want resistance and to historic fact. And I went and saw it and I thought, there is truth there, but there's also a bias that is not truthful. And so we have to try to find, from using, as I said earlier, primary sources. And of course, there's value to oral tradition because many of things weren't written down. But we have to find out what's the balance, because one side or the other will cause trauma, as we saw, you know, in all of our presentations. Those that are a favor, I mean, a statue of Captain Cook had great responses on both sides, as Aaron so aptly presented.
And one of the things that was very striking is again getting to truth telling and making sure that the history is correct, and going forth and back and forth just to make sure that all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed, and even then that's also evolving. And one of the things I thought was very interesting was about a translation or a statement that you received, and the Father Tom Elowat, that the translation was it was mistranslated, so it sounded a lot more harsher or a lot more more polarizing than what was intended.
Yes.
And one of the things that sorry, it looks like Aaron, you had a
I just wanted to say one thing, and it seems to me that, you know, with my fellow panelists, I think there are some key things. One, respect. But I also think what I'm getting is we're all lovers of history, and we want to tell a more complete picture, and we want to be thorough, and we want to look at it from many different vantage points. And sometimes I think there is this idea that history, there's like the history, and it's never that. It's always much more complex. And that's where I find it to be, you know, quite exciting, is when you can go to, as Father Tom said, you know, go to the primary sources. For example, I have been to the British Museum and I have seen Captain Cook's journals. Very few people have ever seen those, certainly in Anchorage. So I know what I'm talking about when I speak on these things. But also back to your point about trauma. I mean, as far as the work that I've done, that whole issue was the most traumatizing thing that I've been doing, because I've been doing this work before that for 15 years. And it's like I'm the one with other people, but, you know, because of my position in the tribe and my position at the museum, I've been doing this kind of work. And so you're not going to do it hastily. You have to do it methodically, and you have to do it thoroughly. And the only way to really do it is to have those conversations. And sometimes, and it's not in a torches out kind of mob meeting type thing. It's in a much more thoughtful way of trying to communicate and hearing the various perspectives. But in this case, with the statue, you just had a lot of people that read about something or saw it on social media and decided, you know, for our sister cities, that was actually the owner of the statue. I happened to be on that committee, and we never had one person show up to our meetings, and all of a sudden we had 400 people. And this is I would also argue this was in the middle of the pandemic, and this was, everybody is sitting in their homes, and they're not, you know, you could argue maybe had too much time on their hands or whatever it was, but it was something I'll never forget. That's for sure. But I think respect, I think having a more building partnerships, and also being thorough are the most important things.
Thank you so much for sharing. And one of the things that it really that I was thinking about as well is, like, again, being methodical, being very thorough, is how we look at the built environment, things that we see every day. And we don't think of, even though we may not think about it, it's a part, or maybe to us, not to us historians, but to people who are not people who are just going about their day, and they just assume, okay, this is this place. Or like you were saying about the name of the creek, that it was like a transliteration, but how erasure happens through place names. And even though you don't consciously think about it, it's that part that's also happening. And one of my notes said that signs are subtle but yet so salient, and even by what's not being said speaks volumes. And I think that's very interesting. When we think about monuments, we don't normally think about place names, but they are monuments to to people and to places.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Can
that's
I
one of the, oh, go ahead.
go ahead? Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, I think for us, because we didn't write things down, our place names are, in a sense, monuments in the sense of our history, and it's communicating that. And um, again, I think I've said it, but I really think it's what Stephen said is quite powerful. And when we're doing this project, we're not saying we are renaming. All I'm saying is we're reintroducing or reestablishing a name, because even if it's not being actively used, which I do want it to be, that's never stopped us from it being that's its name. Now, I didn't grow up knowing those names, but when I see those names, especially, like, so many of them are so descriptive of a place that in a way it almost becomes like a monument. Or the fact that if you look at most of our place names, very few of them are actually named for individuals. There's less than 5% of them that are named after people. They're much more about description of a place. And this gets to a bigger idea, I think, for a lot of indigenous communities where, and even the establishment of the whole park system, it's sort of built on the original, I'm going to call it the original sin of uh, Muir and those that went into these places, these what became parks, like say Yellowstone, and looked out and saw this vast empty wilderness, not realizing that either the indigenous populations had been forcibly removed from those locations or had died off from disease or war. And so, there's no such thing as a pristine, untouched landscape. It's all connected to place. And that's kind of the work that I want to do. So
Thank you.
I want to echo that from the perspective of when you think about Arlington House being a plantation house that is considered a memorial, it doesn't fit, kind of a mold that you might think of as a memorial. And yet here we are thinking about this space that, was built in 1803, but indigenous, people lives in that space for thousands of years prior to this space. And that gets lost when we think about the history of the space. And if we can help people to see that spaces are not just what they see physically when they visit, that's huge. When people come to Arlington National Cemetery, they generally come there to honor somebody who is about to be interred or is buried there. They see a house up on the hill. They have no idea necessarily what it is, but they just think it's part of the cemetery because that is what they see is the cemetery today. They have a hard time peeling back the onion to understand what has brought us to this point today.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you very much for your presentations and your perspective, and also sharing with us your work and the things that is impacting your work. Is there any, I always ask this question during these types of sessions, is there anything that wasn't asked that you want to answer?
I think one of the questions that is worthwhile is how do you get people to be more inquisitive? How do you get people to think about these spaces in ways that maybe they haven't yet thought about, And that's a hard question to answer because it's different for everybody. And as a curator of a space, tell the story, but also be attractive to a widest audience as you possibly can. So as a docent at Arlington House and as a descendant at Arlington House, I am constantly trying to read the visitor to understand how I can help them leave there slightly changed. If we can get people to leave these spaces just slightly changed from where they came in, we have done a great service to them.
If I might add, both for Aaron and Stephen, if I may include you, we're not going to be here forever. So it's important for us to leave a legacy of what needs to be told and how to tell it and why. So in our archdiocese, which we have 5 missions, I'm the director of historic sites, but I also, as I mentioned earlier, I'm on a task force committee for the California bishops, and we are preparing a presentation that can be videotaped to help those 21 missions, the pastors and future pastors, to understand the role of the mission today and its history in the past and the Native peoples, and have Native peoples involved in those discussions as well, and descendants of Native peoples. And so that's part of my job, is to ensure that we continue this story so it continues to be told as accurately as we possibly can, with people that will replace us and other entities as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing. It was in response to Stephen's question that he posed of how do we get people to engage with these places? And it's not an easy question to answer, but what I would say, and I think this also, I think Father Tom would agree, it's how do we encourage critical thinking skills among students in particular, because that's where it's going to happen. And so that to me is a skill that if we can pass on, and through work like this, that to get people inquisitive, to know how to find out more information and do their own research too, and, you know, the things that can be uncovered. But really it's about critical thinking, and it's knowing how history is complex, and it's not black and white, and it's shades of gray, and it's ever evolving. And it's ironic that we live in a world where we have more access to information than we've ever had at our fingertips, and yet so much of it gets lost, or so much misinformation gets spread, that becomes critical thinking becomes even more important, to find those original sources, or to know where these, you know, archives exist, or where museums are telling these interpretive stories, and so on.
Aaron, in church speak, I say amen, alleluia.
Right. So that is very powerful. And thank you again for everyone's presentations and your time. And I really think that is the crux, is to have engaged people, to think, everyone to think about the places where they are, and learning more about the history, because history is definitely layered, and there's so many different parts to, even though we say, okay, A happened, B happened, but there's so many things that happen in between. That is really important to understanding our history. So on that note, I really wanted to thank everyone, to thank our panelists, and to also thank our audience for being here today. We will have another part of the series on September 26th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the presentation, or the webinar, is about international approaches to monument removal, relocation, and reinterpretation. We are not just an organization that's based in the United States, but we're based globally. So this is how we, as a part of our community, our global community, we also have things that we all learn from each other. And this webinar will speak to that. So please stay tuned. And if you have registered for the webinar, we will be sending a short survey just to get your opinions, and how we can always improve upon the webinars in our programming. And again, thank you so much for joining us, and have a great weekend. And we look forward to seeing you at our next events. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. Thanks for
An
having me.
honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep.